May Jesus and Mary be loved by all hearts. A year ago, this month of April 2023, David Murgia of Italian TV 2000 released a video exploring the hemographed clothing that had been newly identified as belonging to Melanie of La Salette. In this first year, the YouTube has garnered almost 200,000 views, and now we are republishing it with a translation for English viewers. He begins with an introduction, a new investigation at the boundaries of the sacred, with a report on the discovery in the archives of the Basilica of St. Alphonsus Maria de Liguori in Pagani, the Salerno province, concerning some clothing that probably belonged to Melanie Calvet, the visionary of La Salette. This discovery could rewrite the history of one of the most important officially recognized Marian apparitions ever. So David Murgia, the reporter, begins. We have arrived in Pagani in the province of Salerno. We are here because this is an important place. Here, in fact, St. Alphonsus Maria de Liguori, the saint of the century of enlightenment, died. Well, in this very place, an exceptional discovery has been made that, if confirmed, could change the history of one of the most important apparitions of the Church, namely that of La Salette. Father Paolo, where is St. Alphonsus Maria de Liguori buried? Father Paolo, currently his mortal remains rest in the little chapel that is next door, within the very framework of this wonderful basilica, dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel and St. Alphonsus. David Murgia, would you show them to us? Father Paolo, of course. David, right in the place where one of the greatest proponents of devotion, of true and authentic devotion to Our Lady, died, you have discovered something that has to do with one of the greatest Marian apparitions of the last century. That is the apparition of Our Lady at La Salette. Father Paolo, St. Alphonsus loved Our Lady viscerally. He defended the Immaculate Conception so vigorously, and then the apparition of the Immaculate Conception, that is to say, the one in Lourdes, where everything was resolved in the moment when Bernadette's priest asked, "But what is the name of the lady?" And she responds, "Her name is the Immaculate Conception." David, and what do we have then in this box? Father Anthony Pupo replies, so in this box we have some clothing with clear blood traces or hemographs. David, so blood. Father Anthony Pupo, blood, yes. David, and when did you find them? Father Anthony, these clothes have been here in this archive for a very long time, but we didn't know until a few days ago to whom they belonged. They had been set aside in a corner of the archive. David, can we say that if our and your hypotheses were confirmed, it would be an incredible discovery that would change the history of one of the most important apparitions of the Church? Father Anthony, I think so, because we, as until very recently, did not know to whom they belonged. Then, through our work of research in the archives, we discovered in a manuscript by one of our Redemptorist fathers that these garments had been given by Melanie's confessor to our postulator general at the time, who then deposited them here in the archives. David. So here would be the clothing worn by one of the visionaries of La Salette, that is, of Melanie Calvet, the girl, the French woman, the recipient, together with Maximin Giraud of the apparition of La Salette. This was the first official, publicly recognized apparition of the Catholic Church, but more importantly, it is the apparition that was made famous in the world because of the famous secret, or secrets, of La Salette, of which both visionaries said they were recipients. Before we show you the exceptional discovery, however, we must take a step back into the past when again, in one of our television investigations, we had managed to document that these so-called secrets of La Salette had been discovered in the secret archives of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the former Holy Office. In 1846, a beautiful lady appeared in a village, La Salette, to two shepherds, Melanie Calvet and Maximin Giraud. This apparition gained the official recognition of the Church. The beautiful lady also delivered a secret to each of the two seers, and these, known precisely as the secrets of La Salette, for over 170 years have been the focus of the attention of scholars and the curiosity, and even a morbid fascination, of the faithful. The contents of these secrets have been much talked about, and over the years, more than one version of these secrets have been written, versions that do not, however, coincide with the original writings. We must remember, however, that because of these secrets and the speculations regarding their contents, the two seers would be shrouded in a kind of black legend, and for this they would suffer greatly in life. After death, they were consigned to oblivion and forgetfulness. Especially for Melanie, the affair of the secrets made her life difficult by creating around her a climate of distrust and sometimes even derision. Because of this, Melanie was forced to wander from town to town until she died in Altamira. Now, Father Gian Matteo Roggio speaks. Melanie Calvet is a complex person because in her own right she is a wounded woman, wounded by life. She was a child forced to beg in the streets of her town, and a person who felt rejected, excluded, cast aside, almost a person who had no right to live. The apparition gave her a new life. The apparition gave Melanie a chance to get out of this situation. The apparition gave Melanie the chance to feel welcomed, the chance to feel alive. Father Anthony, we have 18 artifacts. David, 18 artifacts. That is 18 garments that possibly belong to Melanie Calvet, and that, if the hypotheses were confirmed, would be the object of particular mystical phenomena. Father Anthony, yes, on some of the artifacts, the dates on which these phenomena occurred are also given, and in some other artifacts, also names that refer to priests whom Melanie knew. Melanie's confessors were the Fusco brothers, who were priests originally from Castellammare di Stabia. They were Redemptorists, to whom Bishop Patagna, the one who had brought Melanie from France to Castellammare, had assigned these fathers to her as particular confessors. David, let's open some of these garments now so we can understand what the phenomena are. Father Anthony, here we have the date December 1876, the eve of the Immaculate Conception, as you can see. David, so this is a tunic, a dress. Father Anthony, a petticoat. David Murgia, this is the petticoat of one of the seers of La Salette, and the enigma is these drawings. Father Anthony, we think they are hemographic drawings. David, so they are drawings made with blood. This is a typical mystical phenomena that so many mystics and saints had, even some canonized or canonization candidates. For example, Natuza Evolo. Natuza Evolo was also famous for these phenomena. Father Anthony, for these manifestations. David, these types of manifestations are common to some figures, even, for example, Natuza Evolo. The mystic of Parvati was a recipient of them. Or let us think, for example, of the mystical phenomena of Padre Pio with the stigmata, or with other inexplicable phenomena such as bilocation. Father Gian Matteo, these images are hemographs, that is, drawings, because a drawing is an ordered image. They are images or letters or words that in some mystical experiences we find on the clothing worn by these people or even on their bodies. And on a mystical level, at the level of supernatural gifts, hemographs tell us that these images were not made by the person. It is not that the person went and drew something, either on his skin or on his clothing. They are not tattoos, as are popular today. Instead, they are images that the person does not have authorship of. That is, they are images that he did not make. Father Anthony, in the various biographies, there is no mention of mystical phenomena of Melanie. Only St. Annibale Maria di Francia mentions the mystical phenomena that he witnessed in her. However, we have no other testimonies. So if this information that we have before us is confirmed, it opens up a new story also about Melanie and phenomena that up to this moment were unknown. Father Gian Matteo, if these elements that we have rediscovered today are proven in their authenticity and also provide the possibility of a supernatural origin, this would allow us to rewrite Melanie's life by removing her from those cliches or descriptions that have been attached to her, such as, quote, the hysterical woman, or, quote, the misunderstood saint. Currently, Melanie's life is interpreted under these two lenses, under these two categories. Father Anthony, there are several handkerchiefs with different initials that probably, here we have a VV that could belong to Vincenzo Venditti, who was the postulator of the cause of St. Gerard Majella. Then we have claws that, we are told, were placed on her forehead to wipe the blood from the stigmata on her forehead. David, these manifestations, when would Melanie have had them? Father Anthony, according to the dates here, we are in 1873, February 25th. David, but she always had them, normally during the week of Father Anthony. So some are on the eve of the Immaculate Conception. David interrupts, Marian feasts, Marian solemnities. Father Pupo, or at the time of Lent, Holy Week. Here we have stockings. David, always. Here also are written, Father Anthony, here the date is given. David, we can say that, according to you, Father Anthony, that holiness, however, does not reside exclusively in this manifestation. These are only signs. Father Anthony, yes, they are signs, but they refer to people who already live a holy life. David, so it's not that Melanie is a saint because she was the recipient of these phenomena. Melanie, if she will be declared a saint, proclaimed a saint. It would be for her exercise of virtues. Father Anthony, yes. If these are confirmed, they help us understand also a bit of her mysticism, that she was also a mystical woman. We have testimonies that she was a woman of prayer. This would affirm even more the spirituality of her way of life. David, her way of understanding, obviously, of living also with devotion to the Passion, the day of the Lord's Passion. The important and curious thing is that on the clothes that belong to Melanie, we have drawings or hemography on both the front and the back. So this is the front, Father Pupo, and this is the back. David, the back of the tunic, let's turn it together. Father Pupo, a different design. David, the style is the same, it seems to me. David, Melanie begins to wander away from France after the apparitions of La Salette and is hosted by some bishops. She arrives where and at what period in this area of Italy? Giovanni Pepe comes in. So while she is in Marseille, during her stay in the convent of Marseille, she met the Bishop of Castellamare, Bishop Patagna, who at that time had been sent by the Pope to France. We are in the 1860s and following. So here he met this person who strikes him in an extraordinary way, so much so that when he later returns to Italy, he invites Melanie to come to his diocese. David, how long does she stay in his diocese? Giovanni, 17 years, a very long time. David, it is quite likely then that the Redemptorists who were already here, Giovanni, were her confessors. In fact, one named Father Alfonso Fusco celebrated the Eucharist daily in Melanie's home by permission of Bishop Patagna. So it is likely that all the manifestations found on these garments were collected by this Father, Alfonso Fusco, who later gave them to Father Venditti, who placed them here in the archives. David, how convinced was Bishop Patagna of the sanctity of Melanie Calvet? Giovanni, in many letters he referred to Melanie as, quote, a saint. He used that very adjective repeatedly when talking about Melanie Calvet, also going on to say that she lived in poverty in his diocese. It was Bishop Patagna who hosted her, so he had incalculable esteem for her. Several times he even reproached some bishops who came from France who wanted to force Melanie to return there. He forbade it, saying that Melanie was a free woman and she was free to stay where she wished. David, how certain are we that these clothes therefore belonged to Melanie? Giovanni, it was not known to whom these dresses belonged. David, they could also belong to other mystics. Giovanni, in fact, 3 years ago it was communicated to me by a Redemptorist, Father Ciro Avella, on that occasion of the translation of the body of the mystic Maddalena Feza in the Basilica of St. Alfonso's, that he possessed female artifacts that could be assumed to belong to Maddalena, that is, the venerable servant of God, Magdalene of Jesus, who lived from 1898 to 1989. Since I am very attached to this mystical figure of Maddalena Feza, I began to look into the matter to see if this was possible, but it was quite impossible to be certain they were hers. Then the other day, when looking at this manuscript and studying this manuscript, I came across a sentence that in the end irrevocably attributes these artifacts to Melanie. David, so what happens now? Giovanni, it will require study to determine what those stains and patterns are that we see on the garments. It is true that I, 3 years ago, quite informally, entrusted a garment to a laboratory for analysis, the same laboratory that is presently analyzing the artifacts of Natuzza e Volo. So I entrusted a garment of this to be studied. David Murgia, a garment of Melanie's. Giovanni, of these clothes, and informally, though it was informally entrusted and always informally, there was a response from the doctor who analyzed them. He confirmed to me that it is blood, but it's a completely informal thing, so it absolutely needs to be studied in order to say with certainty what these figures depict, the nature of those figures. There needs to be interventions and a thorough and scientific study. David, what would change if everything was confirmed? Giovanni, I don't know what would change, but certainly Melanie's story would have to be rewritten. These are manifestations of a mysticism that is not common to any person, and moreover to a person who is in bad faith. These manifestations can only be attributed to sincere souls. So what would change? History would have to be rewritten, and hopefully the church authorities, where Melanie is now buried, that is, at Altamura, would one day open a canonization process. David, can you show me where you found this sentence and what this sentence says? Giovanni, so this is the photo of Father Vincenzo Venditti, who died in 1898. We read, Father Venditti, at the time of the suppression, was rector and professor of the seminary of Conversano. He was a confessor. And so it is certain that he was also a confessor of the servant of God, Melanie. And he had the scorched shirts of the aforementioned with the imprints of the souls of purgatory. End quote. And I ask, is Conversano a place name, or does it refer to the seminary and novices because they have committed to a conversion of life? Father Giovanni continues, you cannot imagine, when I read this sentence, a gasp. It was as if I had found a treasure, because this provides mathematical certainty that these clothes belong to Melanie. Everything else is hypothesis. It has to be studied and investigated, but the certain thing is that they belong to Melanie. David, Melanie's story was marked by poverty and suffering, but adversity did not break her. She always continued to bear witness to the message of hope delivered to her by the beautiful lady. Her life was spent in prayer, fasting, and withdrawal from the world. She died in Altamura, where she had found refuge without having revealed to anyone her true identity. For the people of Altamura, she was just an elderly French lady who went to Mass every morning in the cathedral. No one knew her identity. It was revealed only after her death. And thus this video interview ends, but I, Sister Anne, would like to add that with the help of many volunteers and years and many efforts, we have converted a great deal of important documents concerning Melanie and the La Salette story from French to English, which have never been released before in English, and some of them barely published in French. Please continue to check the website houseofmaryomd.org for the release of these things as I try to get them published in various forms. Some I will offer as free, but others I will have to share a copyright with the French publisher. So this is a great thing which will help to clarify for certain that Melanie was indeed a great saint and the most persecuted of saints.